Welcome
Yeah.
back to the BookEnds YouTube channel. So a couple weeks ago, don't quote me on when, because I don't know when this is posted. We did we did a video about whether a bad query will ruin your chances of getting published or getting representation, rather.
Yeah.
Um, it got a lot of questions on it about what makes a book marketable. So we had said that it might not be your query, it might be your book's marketability, and everybody in the comments said, "Well, what the hell does that mean?"
Fair
So
question.
it is a fair question, but I think it's one of the hardest questions to answer in this definitive kind of instructional way.
Yeah,
Um,
because I think like everything about publishing or so many things about publishing, it's a little subjective and depends on the genre
and fake, like suddenly things that we might say that's not marketable at all will just hit and be a New York Times bestseller for a year. You never know. But we've compiled a few things that you should be thinking about to get you in the ballpark of whether your book is marketable. Um, and I'm gonna go a little out of order here just because I think it makes.
Can
Go ahead.
I just pop in quick to explain a little bit what we mean by marketable and what that looks like as a whole? So when we talk about marketable from our aspect, it's sort of a multi-tiered process. Like we're looking at what publishers are buying, because they're looking at what readers are buying and hungry for. And hungry for, I think, is sort of a key phrase there, because yes, readers are buying all of Harlan Coben's books or all of James Patterson's books or all of Nora Roberts' books. But that doesn't mean writing in that tone is marketable, because readers aren't necessarily hungry for that. They're buying that because they've been buying that and reading it for years. So it's also slightly different than trends, because trends can come and go super fast. Marketability is sort of a, where has this genre gone now? So romance is a forever genre, but within romance, there are subgenres where sometimes some are more marketable than others. Historical romance is an example that I often laughingly use, because historical, probably 3 months out of every 3 years, is all of a sudden marketable. All editors are like, we haven't bought any new historical romance in 3 years. We need some. 3 months, people are looking for it. And then they realize the readership is not super high for historical romance. It's pretty level. It's pretty consistent. Now we have enough books, so we're going to back off. That's marketable. That's marketability. That's not a trend. A trend would be, right now, witches are super hot. Everybody's looking for witches, but that's a trend, because it's so specific that most publishers are only going to want like 1 or 2 witch books and then they're done, which makes it really trendy versus sort of a genre or a bigger direction a genre is going. I hope that made sense. It's hard to
It,
explain, right?
it is hard to explain. That does make sense, but I also think that it's the first thing that you should be looking at is like what's on shelves as a
Mm-hmm.
reader, as a consumer. That's the first thing you should be looking at. And then when you're doing that, it's important to keep in mind, like, as it relates to your book, genre conventions, right? So is your genre clear? Is it fitting with the books that you're reading that might be coming out, right? Like if you're writing a historical romance, is it like a historical romance, right? Does it have the conventions of a historical romance? Is it, you
And
know,
also today's historical romance.
yeah,
Don't look at the book you bought 10 years ago that you absolutely loved as what's marketable today, which we're sort of going to get into a little bit in detail, but
yeah, I was gonna say, is it modern? I think
yeah.
the thing that you mentioned about Harlan Coben, James Patterson is those names have been around for a long time, but they're
Yeah.
not necessarily the modern, fresh twist on genre,
No.
which, and that's not a slight against those books because I love those books too, but they're not where the genres are going in terms of modern, fresh storytelling writing. They're
No,
tried and
they're
true. They're what readers love. They're what readers have loved for a really long time. But in terms of fitting where the market is right now and what the market is trying to do, they're mainstays. They're not necessarily the most exciting stuff that's coming out right now.
which is really publishing goals, right? You want to be the author who sticks around for years and years and years and almost becomes your own, you become your own genre in a way. I always say that about Stephen King. Stephen King is not a horror writer. Stephen King is Stephen King. Nora
Yeah.
Roberts is Nora Roberts. They are not within their genre anymore. They've become their own thing.
And they can do what they want too. They
Whatever they
could,
want.
push these genre conventions. They could make things different. They could experiment. They could have all of that with still getting readers. But and it's important to know though, outside of those huge mainstay names, like what is happening in the genre right now, right? Like you mentioned witches, but romantasy, which is a combination of
Yes.
fantasy and romance, huge at the moment.
Yes.
That's something that's happening. That is the market right now. People are really excited about that. It's exploding in a huge way. If you look at the New York Times bestseller, Fourth Wing has been on that list for weeks and weeks now. It's what everybody is clamoring to pick up. TikTok is a huge part of it. So understanding what is being bought and then understanding how those books are being sold and fit on the shelves, right? Like where are they listed in the bookstore or online? What is their little genre? What all the little breakdowns? Knowing what they're doing within the genre and how they're describing themselves is super important. And then
Yeah.
applying that back to your book to see, does your book fit the genre? Even if it's doing something new and exciting, will it appeal to the readers that are buying the types of books that you are writing?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's where how you know your book is marketable is comp titles. Knowing that if you're comping your book and the books you're comping it to are not new and current, and I mean, typically think about more on the debut side or that big author you haven't heard of, but all of a sudden hits. Think of that when you're thinking of your marketability more than, well, let's pick on poor Harlan again. Harlan has a new book out. Well, no, that's different because it's the same series that sold 10 years ago or whatever it is.
Yeah, and that's not to say that your books have to be exactly like those books, but
No, they shouldn't.
the idea that they can fit on the same shelf or they could reach the same readers is what we would be looking for. That's how you would get a better sense of if you're in the right ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, remember when the cronut was a huge thing? Everybody remember the cronut? It was the croissant meets a donut, and it was so trendy. And all of a sudden, all the bakeries are making cronuts. I don't know where I'm going with this. You started laughing. I totally lost my train of thought.
I see where you're going with it.
Right. So that was like knowing your market, you can suddenly start making cronuts, but it's also a bit trendy, so it's going to go away. So you have to have a stronger bakery base to keep your bakery going than just a cronut.
Right.
Right.
I hope we've kept everybody with that. We haven't had a
It's
good food analogy in a long time.
it's fika time, which is Swedish coffee break. So I'm hankering for a cronut, I guess. Which, by the way, I never had one.
Oh, the Dunkin' Donuts one, and I know Dunkin' Donuts not my favorite, but the Dunkin' Donuts one was pretty good.
I never had a cronut. I feel really like I failed myself because I am a donut lover. Anyway, back to our comp
Look
titles.
into that. Yeah. So the flip side of the books that are on the shelves too is the recent deals that are being made and what's being bought right now, which I think a lot of writers might not know how to access or find. And I think Publishers Weekly does a free newsletter, pretty sure, for both children's and adult. Publishers Marketplace, pretty sure it does a free newsletter. Don't quote me.
Publishers Weekly is super expensive. Publishers Marketplace is about $25 a month if you want paid. I don't know what Publishers Weekly does in terms of deal announcements in their free newsletter, but Publishers Marketplace at least used to, and somebody in the comments can correct us, have a free version of their deal announcements. It's not as expansive as the paid for one, but it should give you enough of a flavor of what's going on.
Right.
Just be aware it's not as expansive.
Right. Yeah. But those are good. And also following writers online. It's really important that while you're seeing what's on shelves and you're seeing what's on the bestseller list, that you're also keeping an eye on what's being bought right now, because what's being bought now are the books of a year from now. And if you're writing picture books, usually a book for the 2 years from now. So it's important to, I'm not saying you have to read every single deal announcement. You have to study them, break them. I'm not saying you have to do that. Track it. You don't. I think
No,
casually reading it and knowing, oh, this person is buying this. Oh, I saw something like that last week. Maybe it's, and just sort of keeping an eye on where the market is heading can be a
Yeah.
really good way for you to constantly be assessing marketability of your book that you're writing now.
I want to expand on the "you're writing now" conversation, because what I want to stop everyone from doing this very instant is don't suddenly try to write to trends. Don't be the romance writer who suddenly heard that psychological suspense is really hot, so that's what you have to be writing to get published. Stick within your genre and what you're doing. If you're a contemporary romance writer and you have a killer sense of humor, and suddenly you start noticing a lot of rom-com sales, or your friends start selling rom-coms or whatever it is, maybe you can up the funny in your book and start selling rom-coms. But if you hear this week the historical romances are big, don't drop what you're writing and think that you have to jump to that because it's the only way to get published. It's not. All of these things sell. It's just knowing what the specifics of the genre are asking for. In other words, you know what a romance is, but it's keeping it modern and fresh and to that point.
Right. Yeah. So I think those 3 or 4 things, keeping an eye on those when you're writing and constantly keep an eye on them. It's not something that you could do in one sitting and then be like, got it, my book is marketable. Because I think what people don't always keep in mind is that the market is alive. And I know it sounds weird to say that, but it's a living thing.
Yeah.
And it's moving. There's a lot of players. Things are always being pushed and pulled in one direction. It's always going to be changing. So it is something that writers should be doing on a regular basis. And we say that so many times that you should be reading in all of our videos that you should be reading if you want to be a writer. This is a huge reason why. It's not just so that you know what other people or how other people are writing. It's also so that you can see the larger trends of the industry.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind is you're not going to nail it every time, and you don't necessarily have to. I can't even begin to tell you how often we take on a project and think this is great, everyone's going to jump on it, and like a month later we submit it and everyone's like, oh, we just bought one of these, we have too many of these, we're overloaded with this, we're stepping back from this, and we're like, it happens. It's fine. And this is why I say, don't drop what you're doing and suddenly try to write to a trend, because by the time you write to it, you don't know where that market could be. So stick with what you're doing with knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. Do we want to talk a little bit about how that might look different for nonfiction? And I'm putting that on you because you're the nonfiction pro, but I know there are a few key differences to what makes something marketable.
Yeah, I mean, marketability and nonfiction. So I do prescriptive nonfiction. I don't do memoirs. So I'm not speaking on things like memoirs right now. I'm speaking on narrative and prescriptive, because I think memoirs often read a little bit like a novels. And while there are definitely marketable things in a memoir, I think it matches what novels are doing more than it does other things. The most important thing in nonfiction is platform. That's the thing that's going to sell the book first, which is who you are as the author, what your reach is. Platform is what your reach is. So it's not that you have PhDs and all sorts of letters. It's not that you have this extreme expertise. It's who you're bringing as readers to your book. So it's conferences, you're doing workshops, presentations, your social media, how many followers at any of those given things do you have, so that the publisher looks at it and goes, wow, this author speaks to 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 people every year through either their social media or workshops or combined. We know that they could potentially sell that many books.
But also too,
So that's
if I can add, like the idea that you're talking to that many people or you're doing that many events shows a market, which it's
yes,
not only about selling the book too, but that your message is being received and the message in the book would have that same sort of market.
right. And then the book has to fit the market too.
Mhm.
Like, there are certain things in different genres that people suddenly are hungry for. There are certain places when the economy is in certain sorts of ways, people want finance books. When the job market sucks, people want how to find a job books. I mean, it's pretty normal, right? Like there are certain things and trends in parenting that suddenly become like, oh, all of a sudden everybody in parenting is talking about to vaccinate or not vaccinate. A book on vaccines would be great right now. Those kinds of things feed the market. And then, of course, the same thing as fiction, knowing what's selling. If you are going to write I'm going to use a DEI book because it was a most recent conversation I had. If you're writing a DEI book, but go on Publishers Marketplace deals and see that 5 DEI books were sold in the past 6 months, I can probably promise you that 10 to 15, if not more, books went out on submission on that subject. So either there's not a spot for your book, or you need to look at those descriptions and go, okay, what do I bring to the table that's different from any of these other books that nobody yet has? And that's the key to the market. If you're writing a leadership book, I've read a lot of leadership books. There are a ton of them. What do you bring to the table to make the leadership book different from all the other ones that are already out there that leaders are already buying?
Yeah. Well said.
Thank you. We don't expect anybody to nail marketability. It is, I think what you said about the market being a living thing is super important. I think knowing what it is when you're approaching your book from the writing stage, to be honest. I mean, we all know a mystery is marketable, right? There's a bajillion on there. There's a bajillion on my bookshelf right in front of me. Mysteries are big, but how do you market that mystery to agents that say, okay, you already have a bajillion mysteries on your bookshelf. What is going to make you pick up mine versus all of those others? And that's what's going to make it marketable. Something that makes it different, something that's new, that's fresh, that makes it stand out, that doesn't feel like every other one that's already on my shelf. And that's sort of the key to it, which sounds super simple to say, and I get feels really elusive as an author, but you presumably are a reader of your genre and know when you go to the bookstore and pick up the book, you have a lot to choose from. What do you like to pick up that grabbed your attention, and what about it grabbed your attention, and how can you emulate that in your own way?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily about hitting a target, but getting yourself in the ballpark. Just because of how subjective things are, it's about
Yes.
getting yourself as close as possible, because what's marketable for one agent might not feel for another, but getting yourself as close as possible. And the only way you can do that is with a really strong foundational knowledge of the market itself.
Yep. That's it.
That's it. So we hope this
You
was
made it
helpful.
sound so simple. You know, everybody watching it just wants to throw a stone at this point.
Yeah, there are virtual tomatoes coming our way, but I mean, I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions or anything that we can expand on, put it in the comments below. We review all of our comments. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you back here next week.
Bye.